All right, we will go ahead and get started. So for those of you who are new to the Wireshark study group, I'm just going to go over a couple of administrative type things. So if you go to our website for Black Girls Hack, which is blackgirlshack.org/Wireshark, you will find there a couple of things. You will find the week 1 files, and that was when we did our first week back in June. So we are actually only doing week 2 this week, which is chapters 3 through 4. So chapters 1 through 3 we did before. So those files and those slides are available on the website. So when you get to the website, it is password protected. The password is just password. The password is just Wireshark. And the week 2 slides, which is what we will be covering today, are also available. And I think you have the next couple of weeks up there as well if you wanted to get a head start. So this is meant to introduce you to Wireshark as a tool, but then also there is a Wireshark analysis certification that you can take. So that's why this is so long. So you can, if you're not interested in getting the certification, just pop in and out and learn some things as you wish. But if you're interested in taking a certification, you might be interested in, checking out all of the weeks of this as we go through. So any questions so far? Steve, it looks like you might be trying to talk, but I can't hear you, so.
Oh, no, sorry, I forgot to mute myself.
Okay.
To download the files.
Okay.
I have a quick question because
Sure.
I did put the password in and it just didn't load anything. I did get the link from the Slack channel, but if I was referencing it from your website, is it the W capitalized or is it all lowercase letters? Or?
It's all lowercase. I actually mentioned this to my hosting provider, about to be my old hosting provider. So when you start loading it, you may get something that says post pass at the top, and it doesn't show the page. Just put in blackgirlshack.org/Wireshark again, and it'll load the page. I keep telling them that there is a defect, and they keep telling me it works for them. So thank you for proving that I'm right.
Right, and then now I redid it. I typed it, started all the way over to the beginning and typed the password again, and then it loaded. So thank you.
Yeah, I keep telling them that it's a problem. They're like, no, it works for us. I'm like, okay, all right. Any other questions? So you can get last week's slides from here. And if you click on the link for the all weeks PCAPs files, that will take you to our repository, which has basically all of the PCAP files that are associated with the text that we're using for this. So at the end of each text, it says, at the end of each chapter, it says, hey, these are the files that are used in this exercise, like if you're following along in the book. So if they're relevant to what it is that we're talking about, then you'll see a slide in here that says, hey, these are the files that are used in this exercise, so that you can be able to get those files and use them to see whatever it is that we're trying to see. So this is the schedule. I am co-teaching this with a gentleman named Amran. He will be hopping in towards the end of the schedule. We are doing, it's 33 chapters in this book. It's pretty husky. We did chapters 1 through 3 the last time. This week we are doing chapters 4 through 6. So you'll see the slides for week 2 cover chapters 4 through 6 of the text. And the text is available in the Slack channel, in the Black Girls Hack Slack, if you do not have it. All right, so we are covering chapters 4 through 6 this week. We have a break in between, you'll see between July 31st and August 14th, because that is when Hacker Summer Camp is happening in Las Vegas, and I am actually going this year, so we won't be doing any other Black Girls Hack activities during that week. So there'll be a break, but then we'll pick it back up on the 14th. All right, so chapter 4 exam objectives. So the purpose of capture filters, how to apply a capture filter and build your own set of capture filters, and how to create capture filters using different functionalities within Wireshark. So if you have not seen Wireshark before, what Wireshark does, and I'll just exit out of here real quick just to show you. What Wireshark does is it captures packets that are sent. Can I get everybody to mute, please? Unless you're asking a question. Thank you. So what Wireshark is it captures packets that are communicating over the wire. So when we talk about, for example, some of the protocols, when we talk about two computers communicating, for example, if I was going to have a conversation with Arv's computer, right? I would send out a request to him. We talk about the, Lisa, can I get you to mute, please? I would send out a send packet to say, it kind of says, hey, I'd like to start a conversation with you. Are you there? Are you accepting? Arv would send back a SYNAC if he was willing to have a conversation. And then I would send out an ACK. And then all of the packets that happened after that would have an ACK to show that there's an established communication, right? So this is what happens anytime you, for example, type in www.facebook.com, right? Your computer's going to establish a session with there. So you'll see at the very top of this file, this file is called HTTP Facebook. And it basically, the only thing that happens in here in these 44 packets is that you type in www.facebook.com and it sets up the conversation. So you'll see that there are basically two hosts that are involved in this. The source, which is here, and the destination, which is here, and they're communicating over TCP. And what you'll see is the first thing that happens is it's sent over DNS. And what DNS is domain name server. Domain name server sends out two requests. It sends out an A request, which is here, saying, hey, I'm trying to make a connection with Facebook.com. So it tries to find out who actually has the IP address for Facebook.com. And then they were able to find that. And then they send out a quad A record, which is for IP version 6. So the A record is for IP version 4. And if your system is actually using IP version 6, it'll send out another DNS record that is 4 A's, and that's for IP version 6. So the next thing that happens after we establish what the IP address is for the site that we're looking for is we see the SYNAC, and we see the ACK of the conversation, and then we see a GET request for that web page. Okay, so this is what happens. And once we've established the conversation here, you'll see that all of the packets that are after this have an ACK, which show they're part of an established conversation. Okay, so if you get involved in, like, for example, some of the ethical hacking things, you'll see that there are different types of like firewalls. So for example, and it'll check to see whether or not that there is a packet that's being sent as a part of an established communication conversation. So, and if it's not a part of an established conversation, so there hasn't been a SYNAC, ACK, then it'll know that someone sent it like out of sequence, or that it was sent to, for another cause, and it'll actually just drop it. So, when you're looking at Wireshark, and you see, for example, these black files, then that just means that the file, there was an issue with that packet, and it was either dropped or there was an error in it, and then it's going to be resent. Okay, so because we're using TCP, TCP will make every effort to make sure that your packet actually gets to where it's supposed to go. It's like the equivalent of sending something with like maybe tracking and confirmation through the post office versus just putting it into like the blue box in the corner and it which is UDP and hoping that it gets there. So there's no, tracking of it. There's no, resending of it if it's not, doesn't make it. It's just, hey, I put it in the mailbox and if it doesn't get to you, I'm sorry. So that's the difference between what TCP and what UDP does. So this is basically a packet capture. It is, as you can see here at the bottom of my screen, 44 packets that were in this conversation, and it covers basically, what happens when you, log in to try to get to Facebook.com. So any questions so far? No? All right. So I will get back to the slides. All right. So we talked about the chapter 4 example. So they're using 4 files in this exercise, which you can get from off of our Google Drive file. And those are ESPN files. So the purpose of capture filters. When we're talking about capture filters, what we're talking about is basically the live traffic that is being captured. Okay, so you guys may see in the file that I just pulled up, which was a Facebook file, right? So this file is actually probably from maybe some years ago. So it's not being captured right now. It's not like I just typed in www.facebook. So that is the difference between a live capture, which we would use a capture filter for. So that's just me being able to go, for example, to the front page of Wireshark and being able to capture information, right? Versus me actually just opening up a saved file. So if you are in in cybersecurity, especially if you are a blue team person or someone who's responsible for keeping track of the safety of a network, you may use a packet capture file to, for example, find out if there's a network device that's constantly dropping packets. You may use it to, investigate what might be an attack on your network. There's a lot of different reasons why you may use Wireshark, which is why, this is a very useful tool to know. Regardless of what team you play for within ethical hacking, but it's also useful for determining issues if you are charged with keeping a network safe. So if you are capturing a live capture, which is like, hey, whatever I'm doing on my computer right now, that's not involving capture filter. So I'm sorry, that's not the same thing as what we're looking at now. But if you were to go and click and say, hey, I want you to start capturing traffic right now, then we're talking about a capture filter because it's capturing live traffic right now. And then you can put on a capture filter which says, hey, I only want to capture, for example, IP version 6 traffic, or I only want to capture traffic that's specific to a specific IP address, or only traffic that's over port 80, for example. Okay, so that's basically what we're talking about when we're talking about a live capture. Any questions? No? All right, so that's the purpose of capture filters. They limit the packets that are saved into the location or the directory. So if you turn your packet capture on, if you say, hey, computer, I want you to start capturing all the traffic that's going over the networks. Mahana, can I get you to mute your phone, please? If you say, hey, I want to capture all of the traffic that's happening, right? You can see just from some of the larger packet capture files. All right, you can see from some of the larger packet capture files that it'll capture tens, if not hundreds of thousands of packets, depending on how long you're listening, okay? So the purpose of capture filters are basically for you to only capture and save the information that you care about. So if you're doing, for example, some kind of analysis where you're trying to find out, why your packets that are why someone can't connect to, for example, a certain website, or why they can't connect to the internet, right? You're going to take a look at only the packets that are on, for example, port 80 or port 443, right? So you may set up a packet capture that says, hey, I only want to take a look at those filters, okay? So that'll help you to reduce the amount of traffic that you're looking at. The file that I actually just showed you guys from, going to Facebook, someone, just basically just stopped it so that you only get the 44 packets, but it is easy to end up looking at hundreds of thousands of packets to try to find information. So it's important that if you're only looking for specific things, that you use a capture filter to be able to narrow that down. So our first topic under the capture filters is to apply a capture filter to an interface, okay? So in a previous version of Wireshark, you could apply a capture filter by typing it directly into the capture options window. So in the current version, which is what you probably have if you're downloading it within the past year or so, is that you can capture simultaneously on multiple interfaces, okay? So what that means for you is that you're capturing it over, for example, Ethernet, or you're capturing it over Wi-Fi, you can be able to capture it at the same, multiple captures at the same time. So you can do that by double clicking on the capture filter column to bring the interface settings up, and then they could be used to view each network address, alter the link layer type, alter promiscuous mode, limit packet sizes, and alter the capture buffer settings, okay? So you can build your own set of capture filters. There are some capture filters that happen by default. There is a configuration file that gets saved to your computer when you start defining what you want your capture filters to do, and it'll save that into a .configuration file for you. So you can build your own set of capture filters. So for example, if you work in a place where you only care about traffic that's going over the wireless, and you don't care about any type of traffic, you could save a capture filter that only looks at that traffic, okay? So there are three basic qualifiers that are used in capture filters. The first is the type, which is the type of name or number to which the identifier refers. So this is like port or host or net are the three different types you can use. dir is used to indicate the flow of traffic. So for example, whether or not you're looking for the destination or the source. And then proto, which is a protocol qualifier, is used to limit traffic to a particular protocol, such as I only want to see TCP traffic, or I only want to see UDP traffic. So you can also filter by a protocol, a MAC address, or a host name. So if you're specifically interested in one computer that's not able to connect to the internet, you may want to get rid of all the other traffic on the network, especially if you've got hundreds of people who are sitting in a building, for example, and only be able to look at that specific host name or that specific IP address. Okay, so that'll again help you to narrow down the amount of traffic that you're looking at while it's coming through. So you can filter by the protocol, which uses a primitives such as, for example, ICMP, if you just wanted to make sure that a ping was going through. Wireshark looks at the primitive field in the IP header for the value to indicate whether or not it's ICMP or not. So if you're, have other protocols besides ICMP, it'll only give you the ones that you care about if you set a capture filter. If a protocol does not have a primitive, for example, then you have to set it based on something that specifically identifies that protocol. So that might be an offset or that might be a byte. You can also filter on things like that you can use to identify it, such as a flag. So if we wanted to only see, for example, send packets that are being sent, we could, for example, set a filter for that. And then again, like I said, you can also do a MAC IP address or a host name capture filter to further filter it down. So again, we don't want to be looking at hundreds of thousands of packets. We only want to look at what we care about, right? So that's alternate from, like, for example, if you're taking a look at an incident or someone has broken into your network and you need to find the evidence of that, at that point, you need to see, for example, all of the packets so that you can get a complete story. But if you're trying to troubleshoot, for example, you only need to look at, a specific host or a specific protocol to figure out what's wrong. This is how you, narrow that down. Any questions so far? All right, so you can also capture only one traffic's application only. Okay, so if you only wanted to capture, for example, traffic that is running over DNS, for example, port 53, you can do that using application traffic only. Okay, so if you have specific information that is, if you're tracking, for example, one application that's not working, maybe it's not working on a particular, like, I don't know, FTP server or something, or whatever it is that you're taking a look at to try to figure out why it's not working. You can capture just that application's traffic as long as you know the primitives or the protocols that identify specifically that application. So this uses Boolean operators. So if you're taking a look and you're saying, hey, how do I want to see, for example, anything that's on port 53, but only if it's over, UDP or something, right? So you can use a Boolean operator in order to be able to combine capture filters or to be able to do negation. So if you remember, if you ever done, for example, like a SQL injection, you're saying, hey, and 1 equals 1 or not 1 equals 1 or something like that, right? You can use those same Boolean operators, which is the logical and or, which is the ampersand sign here and then the pipe here to say or, okay? So these operators can help you make your capture filter a little bit more specific, and you can also do capture filters by specific bytes within the data. So what are the difference between a capture filter and a display filter? So a capture filter, again, is for live traffic that you are watching currently happening versus a display filter, which is for files that you've already captured in the past. Okay, so you should know if you get ready to go and take the exam, what the difference is between a capture filter and a display filter. And then what format is used by Wireshark's capture filters. So this is information that you would get out of the text. So if you are up on chapter 4, 5, and 6, so the expectation is that you have read the materials for the week by the time we come to the study group, so that you can be able to answer these questions. But I realize some of you guys, this is the first time that you are taking a look at it, and then being able to determine what the purpose of capture filters is. So in this case, this is looking at it's only looking for the destination that has this address here, or it's only looking for information that's specifically over a certain host or a certain gateway. Okay, so those are the questions that are at the end of chapter 4. You will also see that there are several files in there to be able to test your capture filter or your display filters, which were listed in the beginning of the chapter. So this one, it should actually say Ethernet, not EITHER. And the purpose of this right here is so that it captures all traffic sent to the Ethernet address here. Okay, and this gateway 1 captures traffic to or from the hardware address here. And for this one ESPN, it captures traffic to or from the IP address associated with this hosting. Okay, so you should just be aware of being able to narrow down what it is that you're looking for. So any questions about any of the chapter 4 stuff? No? All right. So chapter 5, examine objectives. So chapter 5 is talking about defining global and personal preferences. So again, this is just about making it so that when you log in, you don't have to do a lot of configurations. So we'll be talking about those, and there are a couple of trace files that we'll be using in this exercise. So you can find those exercises in the Google Drive. And then I think I mentioned this last week or the last time we met. But so the extension here. So if you see, for example, a PCAP file, that would be probably one of the older files. This PCAP NG now is PCAP Next Generation. So if you see, for example, PCAP, Wireshark allows you to still open up a PCAP file. So there are still some programs that will just capture a PCAP file. But then some of the newer programs will capture a PCAP NG, which is next generation file. So both of those are valid extensions for Wireshark. All right, so configuration settings. So Wireshark allows you the option to set both global and personal configurations. So that might be important if you have a lot of people, for example, who are using Wireshark, but then you want to have configurations specifically for yourself. Okay, so maybe you want to see specific colors, maybe you want to see just things displayed a certain way. You can set your own personal configurations, and those are different from global ones. Okay, so your personal configurations will override any global ones if you decide that you want to use those. So we've discussed some of the configurations that you can do as far as the display filters, color filters, and then also services. So when you use Wireshark to add or capture or display filters for colored rules when an original file and saves the new version in your personal configuration folder. So whenever you say, hey, I want you to show, for example, all, for example, HTTP traffic in green, if you wanted to, right? So when you do that, if it overwrites whatever the default setting is for TCP traffic, then it'll save that into your personal configuration folder. So all of the configurations that you do, including colors, the way that you might have columns set up, any of the information that you have specific to you, that'll be stored in your personal configuration folder. So you can also share that with these personal configuration files with other people if you want to. And you can also configure files for different networks depending on what type of traffic that you're looking for. So if you're only looking at WLAN traffic, then you can have a configuration file specific for WLAN. It doesn't have to be basically a global personal configuration, which covers all scenarios. You could have different filters for different types of assignments that you may have. So Wireshark allows you to define your capture preferences. So capture preferences can be used to select a default interface for capture and apply some configuration settings to that interface. So for example, if you take a look at, we go over here. No, that's just not what I want to do. If we come here, you'll see that we are able to capture files over a lot of different things. So we have Ethernet, we have local area connection, we have an adapter for loopback, which is capturing traffic information. We have Wi-Fi, Ethernet. So you'll see that for my computer, there's probably 5 interfaces on here that have traffic, right? This may be different from your computer. So you can do a capture filter that says, hey, I only want you to capture specific traffic that is only over Wi-Fi or over, only over port, 53 or something. Or you could do it for all interfaces, all the traffic, right? But again, when you start capturing traffic, you'll see that, it basically, if you can see the number here at the bottom, it jumped to 1,000 really quick. And this is just the stuff that's going on in my network, right? So let's open. So it can capture a lot of different information quickly. So you can save, like I said, your configuration. So like, let's say if you wanted to put all of the packets that were involved in a certain conversation as a certain color, right? So you can say colorize the conversation, and you can say, hey, I want all of this TCP traffic to, I like this pink here, right? So all of the things that are involved in that conversation as you go throughout this file are going to be saved in this pink color. So that'll allow you to identify the traffic that's a part of that conversation. Okay, so this is not that serious when we're looking at a packet capture that only has 44 packets. But let's say if you've got thousands, you want to make sure that you have everything that is a part of that same conversation. So the other thing that you can also do to see what's in the same conversation is you can right click and you can say follow the TCP stream. And what that'll do is that'll basically give you everything that's a part of this conversation. So as you can see, it got rid of everything else that was in here. So we originally had 44 packets and we're only showing 21 now because there are only 21 packets that are a part of this specific conversation, okay? So there are other things that happened in here, but these are the ones that are, relevant to this conversation. So if you're trying to troubleshoot something that's related to this specific conversation, you might want to follow a TCP stream or a UDP stream, okay? So you'll see in here, we have like the header information, which gives us a certain amount of information. We see that it's trying to get to, Facebook, and you'll see that most of this traffic was sent over, HTTPS, because you'll see that this is not in clear text. So this is, directly opposite from, we'll see a little bit later when we take a look at some traffic like Telnet, which is available in the clear, right? So instead of seeing everything encrypted, you'll see, for example, if somebody typed in, username Bob, then you'll be able to see, that they typed in username Bob. And then when they type in their password is, Bob1234, you'll be able to see that that's what they typed in there, and it'll be in the clear text. So, if someone is able to listen to traffic on your network, and no one will actually know. It's not like this is me listening, just eavesdropping on the conversation through Wireshark. It's not like a person who's looking at the network is going to be able to tell that I'm listening to the traffic. So this is not an active method, right? This is and you can find out a lot of information just from just listening, not necessarily interacting or sending any packets, but just listening to the packets that are being sent on the wire. All right, so you can define your capture preferences to be used to select the default interface for capture. So again, if you only cared about Wi-Fi, then you only want to have your capture things to focus on Wi-Fi. You can also select a default interface for faster capture. So for, again, if 99% of the time you're looking at a specific interface, you can set that as the default. And you can enable promiscuous mode to analyze other host traffic, can be done to allow an interface to capture packets that are not addressed to the interface's MAC address. So, for the most part, if it's not in promiscuous mode says, hey, if I happen to overhear any conversations, don't filter any of that traffic. Just give me all the conversations that are happening over the wire, right? If it's not in promiscuous mode, then the only way that they would know about something is if that information is sent specifically to that specific host or to that, something where they're listening. Okay. So, but when you say, hey, I want to enable promiscuous mode, then it's going to mind everybody's business. If it's not a promiscuous mode, it's going to only mind its own business. Okay. So just think about that as like the equivalent of reading your neighbor's mail before it gets to them, which is useful if you are reviewing network traffic. But again, maybe your neighbors don't want you reviewing their mail. Okay. And then here I mentioned again, packet capture files used to be called PCAP, but then you'll see that the newer files are named PCAP NG. So you can set your preferences to automatically resolve IP and MAC names. So for example, if you know that a certain IP is coming from, a certain device on your network. So let's say if you've got let's say a smart microwave, right? And you're taking a look at your network traffic and you want to make sure that whenever you see that microwave's traffic on your network, that you just display microwave so you can ignore it, right? You can automatically resolve IP address names or MAC names or devices within your network. So again, if you're instead at a company, this may be useful to be able to figure out, all right, well, these IP addresses are for the accounting department and these ones are for the IT department, right? So that you can automatically resolve that information. So Wireshark offers many options for name resolution. The most commonly used are options for MAC name resolution, transport name resolution, and network name resolution. So just a note that if you do name resolution, preferences, this can impact your performance. So it may make it very slow, because if it's doing, again, most of this chapter are talking about live capture, right? So if you're asking it to do name resolution real time, it's going to impact your performance, and you may not get as much traffic, is what this is saying. So network name resolution uses the host file lookup process or inverse DNS queries to resolve IP addresses to the host name. And if network name resolution is enabled, you can also enable concurrent DNS resolution and define the maximum number of concurrent requests for faster name resolution processing. So again, Wireshark has got it set up so that if you need to look for specific information, it can help you so that you don't have to do the translations yourself. It'll just show you, what the IP address resolves to. But again, just be aware that this may impact your performance. So define how Wireshark handles TCP traffic. So TCP is mostly used for configuration. You can alter many key TCP dissected behaviors, such as the TCP checksum validation, how to allow subdirectors to reassemble TCP streams. So sometimes you might see that TCP packets are broken up. Analyze, let's just say TCP sequence numbers, use relative sequence numbers, track the number of unacknowledged bytes, and then calculate the TCP conversion timestamps. So you may have learned as you were learning things about TCP, and TCP is the one that does its best to try to make sure that your traffic gets there. There is a sequence number that goes out in the conversation. So we sent, I talked about earlier how, I wanted to send out a packet to someone, it sends out a send, a SYNAC, and then an ACK. Within here, there's a sequence number. So it starts off with sequence number 0, and then the next time that this, particular device sends out, for example, another packet, then the next sequence number should be, 1. And then on the other side of the conversation, whoever I'm communicating with, they've got their own sequence number. So let's say their sequence number starts at, 70. Their next packet that sends out is 71. Okay, so and the sequence numbers are not related between two parties that are communicating. So it just matters, like if you think about it like an order number. Maybe I've sold 150 orders prior to today. So I'm, my next order number is going to be 151, right? But somebody else may have sold 1,000. So their sequence number is going to be different. So it's important to keep track when you see like some of the sequence numbers and you're like, hey, well, this doesn't make any sense. It's basically based on, because each individual endpoint in the conversation has its own sequence numbers depending on which packets it's sending out. And you could take a look, for example, at the endpoints by going to statistics and endpoints, and we'll see that there are within here basically 4 computers or 4 hosts that are within this conversation that are identified within this Facebook file we're looking at currently. All right, so the questions for chapter 5. So again, this was just basically just about configuration. So it says, how does Wireshark's network name resolution use DNS? And then why would you want to alter Wireshark's preference settings? And then the last question is, what is the difference between a global preference and a personal preference? So if you are following along in the book, you'll see on page 180, you'll see that they have the answers to this question. So you can just, as you're testing yourself, figure out like, hey, do I know what the answer to this is? And if not, the answer to the question is available at the end of the chapter. So any questions about chapter 5? Okay. Chapter 6 is talking about colorizing traffic. So this is about using colors to differentiate traffic, disable one or more coloring rules, share or manage coloring rules, identify why a packet is of a certain color, colorize conversations to distinguish them, and temporarily mark packets of interest. Okay. So again, you may say, hey, as you're looking at traffic, especially if you're doing it live, you may say, hey, I need to come back and take a look at this packet a little bit later so you can mark it, but you can do that using colors. So you'll see that there are some default coloring rules that are in here. So I just made all of the packets that are part of this conversation green. I'm sorry, pink or purple or whatever this is, right? But you'll see that there's some default colors. So you'll see that the DNS traffic by default is showing up as blue. You may see that, TCP, HTTP traffic shows up as green by default. Packets that have issues or need to be retransmitted, it will show up as in black. So there's different colors that are, set up by default, but then you can also set up your own color conversation rules. So if you wanted to, you could say colorize the conversation, or you could also, go and say, hey, I want to change, I don't want to see DNS as blue, I want to see DNS as something else. And that'll save within your personal configurations files. All right, so the files that we're using in this chapter, the Facebook file, there's a checksum invalid file, which we expect is probably have like a lot of black things in here. And then there is an AOL, HTTP AOL file. So colors are probably one of the most common and effective ways to be able to locate and highlight packets of interest. You can choose to colorize packets to indicate an error condition that contain evidence of a network scan or a breached host. So again, like if you wanted to, if you're doing an analysis because your job is to protect a network, you can say, hey, I can see that the malicious actor broke in here at this particular packet. So you may put everything in a certain color. And then when you send it to, like, for example, an investigator or someone else to take a look at it, you may say, hey, take particular interest of all of the ones that are in the dark blue because that shows the evidence of the breach, for example. So you can use Wireshark for the different coloring rules. There are predefined coloring rules, which are color filters. Coloring rules require a name, a string, a foreground color, and a background color. So what that means to you is you'll see that, for example, this has a black background, but the text is showing up in kind of maybe a red, right? So there's a background color, there's a foreground color, there's a font color, right? And then it has a name. And then you may see, for example, that where some of them just have a background color and maybe a name, but there's no, for example, different color fonts. So most of the other things that you see, except for things that are in an error condition in here right now by default, basically have black text. The things that we'll see that don't, have black text are because it's either an error condition or we wanted to identify something specific through our personal preferences. So coloring rules. So Wireshark, like other Wireshark rules we discussed for capture filter, you can also share and manage coloring rules. So again, like I said, if you wanted to send this to another department, so we, for example, set up a coloring rule that says hey, I want you to color, TCP, SYN or FIN flags a certain color or coloring rules for this, which is TCP flags and particular byte, right? So it'll tell you, it'll tell you specifically why it colored that. So in this case, it says this is FIN and ACK, which is why the coloring rule was applied. So it'll tell you, if you take a look at the specific frame, why a certain coloring rule was used and what criteria it met for that. So you can use the import and export buttons in the coloring rules windows, and packets can also be examined in the frame section in the packet details window to determine why a packet is colored a certain way. So when we take a look at, I pulled up all of the, all of the packets that are in this conversation, and I turned them pink, right? So we should be able to see in here, for example, it would say, let me see where it's in the frame. It specifically says, hey, coloring rule for strings, coloring rules for name. And it basically says that I wanted it to be a certain color. So that's the reason why you'll see all of the things that are in this specific conversation will have this same rule on here. So this coloring rule is not something that was sent specifically in the packet itself. It was added there based on the thing that I said, which was I want everything that's in this conversation to be displayed in pink. So you'll know based on looking at the information in the frame why something is colored a certain way. So we should be able to see, for example, if we take a look at this one, we'll see that this one, the coloring rule is showing a bad TCP packet. And that's the reason why it's showing up in black, with the red font over top of it. It's because it is a bad TCP packet. So we expect that because TCP is going to give us our best effort, that that packet is going to be resent again, so that we can make sure that that packet is actually received by whomever it's supposed to be received by. And let's see. So more coloring rules. There are 10 temporary colors, options to colorize conversations. So I just picked one of the random ones. You can right click on any packet in the packet list file and select to color a certain conversation. So you can have up to 10 different conversations with different colors. Coloring rules will remain in effect the next time you open the trace file, but they will not be in effect when you restart Wireshark. So again, if you restart your Wireshark and you try to come back and you're like, hey, where are my conversations? It's not going to show up because it's only going to be there as long as Wireshark stays open. So we're going to take a look at the IP checksum invalid to take a look at some of the coloring rules there. Let's see. IP checksum invalid. So you'll see in here that there are a lot of files. Like normally we see a lot of blue, we see a lot of the green, but we'll see in here now that there are some other colors involved. So if we open up one of these packets, and we scroll down, we can see what the coloring rules are. So again, this one specifically says it's looking for a TCP flag and then 002, and it's looking for a fin flag, right? So we expect that that's why this is having the specific colors. And then when we look at these, we'll see the coloring rule is for TCP, basically anything that's TCP is going to show up in this purple. So again, I can change this if I don't like the purple, if I want it to show up as something different. And then we can also see, for example, that this particular one is showing up as an HTTP. So any packets that are HTTP traffic are showing up as green per our coloring rules here. And I think that is, yes, that is all that we have for today. So any questions?
Yes, hello, Paulo here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Concerning the sequence number, it was not so clear if the sequence number is just the order of the capture or is a sequence based on the conversation?
So the sequence is based on the conversation, right? So if I wanted to send a message to you, right, and I want to start my sequence number, so we could take a look at the TCP to take a look at the sequence. So we'll see that the sequence number here starts off at number 1. Right. And if we take a look at the next things that are in this conversation, our expectation is that the next conversation that we see in this TCP stream, that the sequence number should just increase by 1. OK, so the next sequence number should be 1 in the conversation. Right. So because this sequence number started at 0, I'm sending off a send, for example. Someone is going to send back a SYN-ACK, right? But again, their sequence number is not going to be the same as mine. Their sequence number is wherever they're starting at. So in this case, they could be starting off at 0 also, right? So the next message that I send to you, it should have the next sequence number, which is number 2 in the sequence number in the sequencing. So each packet in the conversation increases the sequence number by 1. Okay, but again, you should just be aware that if we have 2 endpoints that are in this conversation. So in this case, we have IP address 10.2.110.167 and IP address 10.2.0.1. Each one of these are going to start with a different sequence number. It may coincidentally be the same, but you should expect that if we see some of the conversations later in here, that the sequence numbers have gotten larger. So again, the current sequence number that we're looking at now is 646. Okay, so it just depends on how many packets are involved in the conversation. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes. The first question is, in fact, as a consequence, can we use this sequence number to do some, I don't know, to do some check in details to see, for example, kind of man in the middle attack that may not respect this sequence? Don't know if it is a valid question.
Oh yeah, so I think what you're asking is whether or not we can use the sequence number to try to figure out if there's a packet that's sent, for example, in some other way, right? So for example, like as an ethical hacker, one of the things that I teach folks all the time is that, you know, if you're trying to see whether or not a firewall is going to let it in, you know, you can send a packet. We can do packet crafting, right? So I can send a packet and I can say, hey, I want this packet to have, you know, for example, sequence number 1 or something like that, right? So if your firewall is, for example, a stateful firewall, so what stateful means is that it's aware of where it's at in the conversation. So I mentioned to you guys, when we start off a conversation, we have a send that's sent from one computer to the next. So we can see that here in packet number 1. The next step is that the recipient of that packet sends back a send act, and then I send back an act to acknowledge that the conversation happened. So that's a 3-way handshake, right? So each one of these is going to have its own sequence numbers, right? So if I try to send in as an ethical hacker, for example, a packet that, you know, I've sniffed this traffic and I try to send a packet that has whatever the next sequence number is to try to, like, for example, do like a, you know, take over that session, for example, if my sequence number doesn't line up what it is that it's expecting, it's going to know that the TCP segment is not a part of an established conversation, and it's going to boot that packet. Okay, so that's if you're using like a stateful firewall. There are some firewalls that, you know, just basically just are looking for traffic and doesn't necessarily keep track of whether or not it's part of the conversation. In which case, it's just going to know, like, hey, is this valid for, you know, I'm expecting, you know, maybe a SYN or a SYNAC or a FIN or urgent or something like that. You know, it's not, you know, malformed. So, you know, I'll allow it. It's not keeping track of, for example, where we're at in the conversation between two computers. So it really just depends on what type of configuration is available on the other side. So, you know, we can use the sequence numbers to make sure that we have something within the correct range to, you know, maybe send a packet in if we need to find out some certain information or to find out whether it's accepting, you know, communication, or, you know, it may actually be a part of the conversation. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Very clear.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, so the password for the is Wireshark. So again, I think I don't know if it was this this class. I think I mentioned to the folks in the Capture the Flag practice earlier. When you have web crawlers and the web crawlers go and you know, scan your website, you know, if you have the file specifically in a robots.txt file, it'll say, hey, I don't want you to take a look at this. But another way that you can do that is to put a password on the file. So like sometimes you'll see that some of our sites have a very simple password. It's not meant to necessarily keep anyone out. It's just meant that so the, you know, the files that I'm putting up there are not, you know, showing up on the internet. So it's very simple password just to make sure that the stuff that I'm putting out there is not, you know, just available for everyone. Any other questions? All right, so we will be continuing. We'll be doing week 3, which is 7, 8, and chapter 7, 8, and 9. So you should read those chapters in the text, and like the text is available in the Slack, or you can purchase it online, depending on, you know, what you want to do. But if there's no more questions, then I will see you guys in the Slack.